Starting today, the female reproductive system, and the first topic that we are discussing in the female reproductive systems is going to be the oogenesis. Oogenesis means the production or the formation of the eggs. So genesis is the formation or production, and I mean by egg. The stem cell that will start to divide to become a mature ovum, this is what we call the oogonium. The oogonium is the stem cell that has pairs of chromosomes. The oogonium will divide by a mitotic division. I will pass through mitosis. And remember, mitosis will result in the production of two daughter cells, which will have a complete genetic material like the mother cell. Same genetic material like the mother cell. So no big change in terms of genetic content. I have the same genetic content like the oogonium. What do we call those cells that will result from the mitotic division of the oogonia? Those are called my primary oocyte. Primary oocytes will be dividing by meiosis. Remember, a meiotic division, I will be dividing a diploid cell 2 times in order for me to get haploid cells. If you remember, what's a haploid cell? A haploid cell has only half of the genetic material. And major reason why I need to perform meiotic division in my body is to produce the gametes or the sex cells, like the sperms, like the eggs. So you see on here, the primary oocyte will be dividing by meiosis, and the meiosis here is formed of 2 successive cell divisions. So I will pass through meiosis 1, and then I will pass through meiosis 2. Those are the 2 successive cell divisions that will result in the production of the haploid cells, which are going to be responsible for the fertilization. The primary oocyte, once passes through meiosis 1, we're gonna call it the secondary oocyte. Only one secondary oocyte will result from the meiotic division, and you see on here. But how will I be reducing the number of chromosomes? I need to get rid of half of the chromosomes, so I will be forming what we call a polar body. Doesn't have much importance normally in terms of fertilization, doesn't have major functions normally in terms of fertilization of the egg and the production of a baby. So polar body would be formed, and one primary oocyte will result from the first meiotic division. Meiosis 2 of the secondary oocyte is what will result in the formation of a mature ovum, and this is the cell that has the ability to integrate its genetic material with the genetic material coming from the sperm for me to be able to form a zygote that will start to proliferate to become an embryo. But you see on here also, in order for me to perform this division, I did need to reduce the genetic material in the cell. So I would be getting rid of part of the genetic material in cells that would be produced here. This is my polar body. We're gonna call the first one the primary, and the second one is a secondary polar body. So this is a cell here that has the ability to get fertilized by sperm and to produce the zygote. You see on here, this doesn't essentially take place all the time. So for example, the mitotic cell division here of the oogonium that allows the formation of primary oocyte, this only takes place before birth. It will stop after birth. That's why females will have menopause, because they have a limited number of primary oocytes. So once I deplete those primary oocytes, I will pass into menopause. So this mitotic division takes place only during fetal life. Those primary oocytes will be kept inactive in the form of follicles, as we're going to see in the next slide. Until when? Until puberty. Every month after puberty, only one primary oocyte kept in the mature follicle will be allowed to complete the first cell division of the meiosis and will be transformed into secondary oocyte. Only one every month will be produced. And this is a type of egg that will be released by ovulation. So if the egg is gonna be ovulated, it's gonna complete meiosis 1, resulting in the formation of secondary oocyte. Secondary oocyte will not complete meiosis 2 to become a mature ovum unless it gets fertilized or penetrated by sperm. So what triggers the secondary oocyte to complete meiosis 2 is the penetration of the sperm to the secondary oocyte. If no sperm is present this month, so the secondary oocyte that will be formed will pass through atresia and it will never become a mature ovum. So the presence of the sperm binding to the receptor on the secondary oocyte is what's gonna trigger the secondary oocyte to complete meiosis 2 and becomes an ovum. Alright, so moving on to our next topic in the female reproductive systems is going to be the folliculogenesis and the menstrual cycle. So folliculogenesis, from its name, this is simply the production genesis of follicles. What is a follicle? Remember the name of the eggs kept in the ovary. We have the form of primary oocytes which are kept in the ovaries, and those primary oocytes are not gonna be free in the ovary. They will be surrounded by cells. Those are the follicular cells, and together the oocyte and the follicular cells are what we're gonna call the follicle. So normally the primary oocytes will be kept in the ovary from the day of birth until adulthood, until puberty, in the form of primordial follicle. So what is the shape of the primordial follicles that I have in here? Primordial follicle is going to be formed of primary oocyte, and surrounding the primary oocyte we're going to have one row of flat cells. Those are the follicular cells. Each month after puberty, what's going to happen? The hypothalamus of the brain will be releasing GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. The gonadotropin releasing hormone will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH and LH. Those are the gonadotropin hormones. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone and LH stands for luteinizing hormone. From its name, what is the function of FSH? I am stimulating the follicle. This is the follicle that the FSH is going to be stimulating. Every month, FSH will rise, and this will stimulate some of the primordial follicles kept in the ovary to start the maturation process. So some of the follicles kept in the ovary gonna be stimulated, and they will start to become primary follicle. You see on here, nothing gonna happen to my oocyte. I still have a primary oocyte inside the primary follicle. But what happens, rather than having squamous cells surrounding my egg, those cells are going to become cuboidal in shape. Then the primary follicle, still under the effect of FSH, will become a secondary follicle, and the secondary follicle on here still gonna have a primary oocyte. Remember, you will not be able to complete meiosis 1 to allow the transformation of the primary oocyte to secondary oocyte unless this egg is gonna be ovulated. It reaches a mature follicle. So secondary follicle is not yet a mature follicle. So I still gonna have a primary oocyte inside my secondary follicle. Still under the effect of FSH, the secondary follicle will become the mature follicle, or what we call the Gravian follicle. So you see on here, this is how the Gravian follicle is gonna look like. You see, I am formed of multiple cell layers surrounding my... What kind of egg do you think I have inside the mature follicle? Yes, you still have primary oocyte. You will not get a secondary oocyte until the time of ovulation. You see, the follicular cells around the primary oocyte will start to fuse together and will form a fluid-filled space. This is called the antrum of the Gravian follicle. All those growing follicles are going to be releasing an ovarian hormone that we call the estrogen. And the estrogen here will be released by large amounts from my mature or Gravian follicle. So the mature follicle, the secondary, primary follicles, those growing follicles are going to be releasing an ovarian hormone, which is my estrogen. Mature follicle will be releasing much more estrogen compared to the rest of those follicles. And this large amounts of estrogen will have a positive feedback on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. This sudden increase in the estrogen level coming from the Gravian follicle will enhance the anterior pituitary gland to release large amounts of LH, or luteinizing hormone. So LH on here will be rising suddenly, and we call this the LH surge. This sudden rise of the LH will result in 3 major effects. First one is going to be the maturation of the primary oocyte into secondary oocyte. I will be allowing the primary oocyte to complete the first phase of meiosis. Another effect of the LH surge is going to be the release of the egg from the follicle. And this process is what we call the ovulation. So ovulation going to be taking place under the effect of this LH surge. A third effect is going to be the transformation of those follicular cells that were surrounding the primary oocyte into a yellow body that we call the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is going to be responsible to release a different ovarian hormone that we're going to call the progesterone. Progesterone gets its name. Pro means before, and gestation means pregnancy. This is a hormone that will rise before pregnancy, and as we're going to learn, the progesterone is stimulating the maturation of the endometrial lining for it to be a suitable place for the fetus to be implanted. So what happens if no fertilization did take place this month? So again, this happens every single month. If no fertilization of this egg, no penetration by a sperm, so no sperm did bind on here to this secondary oocyte that was ovulated, this will result in atresia of the ovulated egg, and the corpus luteum also gonna be broken down, and this will result in a drop in the progesterone levels. Normally, the progesterone is gonna be reducing all the pituitary hormones. So it's going to be inhibiting both FSH and LH. It has a negative feedback on the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. So what's going to be the effects of those ovarian hormones on the endometrium? What is the endometrium first? As what we've discussed back with the female reproductive system anatomy, remember, the uterus is going to be divided into 3 layers. We have an outermost layer. This was surrounding the uterus. And remember, surrounding is peri. And something related to the uterus is going to be metrium. And then underneath the perimetrium, we did have the muscular layer, the muscle layer of the uterus. This is my myometrium. And to the inside, we're going to have the layer lining the uterus from inside. This is endometrium. So again, 3 layers are forming the wall of the uterus. Those are from outside in: perimetrium, myometrium, and then endometrium. What we're looking at in here, we are looking at the endometrium. So endometrium is going to be divided into 2 layers. I have the basal layer. This is called the stratum basalis. Stratum basalis, or the basal layer. And this layer is not hormonally affected, is not responding to the changes taking place in the ovarian cycle. The layer that will be responding to the ovarian hormonal changes, this is my stratum functionalis. Normally, the stratum functionalis is going to be increasing in thickness under the effect of the estrogen. And again, where do you get the estrogen from? The estrogen is released from the growing follicles. So each month, while I'm transforming the primordial follicle into a mature follicle, those growing follicles are going to be releasing estrogen, and the estrogen here will stimulate the endometrial lining of the uterus to increase in thickness. And we call this phase of the menstrual cycle, this is the proliferative phase. What happens on day 14? On day 14 of the menstrual cycle and the ovarian cycle, what's going to happen? This sudden rise of LH that we've called the LH surge will stimulate the mature follicle, enhancing the rupture of the follicle, allowing ovulation to take place and the corpus luteum formation. Corpus luteum, if you remember, this was releasing progesterone, and the progesterone here will be increasing the thickness of the endometrial lining. Also, it's gonna be engorging the blood vessels and increasing the secretions from the endometrial glands. So you see on here the effect of the estrogen on the endometrial lining. It's gonna be stimulating the glands formation. It's gonna be increasing the number of vessels inside the endometrial lining. It's also gonna be adding receptors for the progesterone to act on those glands. Compared to the progesterone, it's gonna be engorging the vessels with blood. Those are the spiral vessels of the endometrium. I am filling them with blood. I will be filling the glands with secretions. And that's why we call this phase of the menstrual cycle, this is the secretory phase. So again, what we've seen so far, we've seen during the proliferation of the follicle, I am releasing estrogen, and remember, estrogen will enhance the glandular formation and the blood vessel formation of the stratum functionalis of the endometrium. On day 14 of the menstrual cycle, what happens in the ovary? We're gonna be releasing large amounts of estrogen from the Graafian follicle. This will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release large amounts of LH, and this is what we've called the LH surge. LH surge will cause the ovulation, corpus luteum formation, and the maturation of the egg. Remember, corpus luteum is going to be releasing what hormone? Progesterone. And the progesterone will be stimulating the glandular secretions from the endometrial lining. It's going to be engorging and filling the blood vessels of the endometrium with blood. And this is what we call the secretory phase. Alright, so here we're going to have blood filling the spiral vessels, and the glands are going to be filled by glandular secretions. So why do you add blood vessels? Why do you engorge them with blood? Why do you fill the glands with secretions? Simply to create a suitable medium for the fetus to be implanted. Because every month, if I got an ovulation, I'm expecting a baby to be formed. If you've got an ovulated egg, you might have pregnancy taking place. What happens if no fertilization of this egg take place? This will cause the degradation of the corpus luteum after 14 days. If no fertilization did take place, the corpus luteum will be degraded after 14 days, and this degradation of the corpus luteum will cause a drop in the progesterone level. And now, do I have any ovarian hormone if I have a drop in the progesterone level? No. Why? Because simply the progesterone did have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. You don't have FSH, you don't have LH, and if you don't have FSH, you're not growing a follicle, and you don't have estrogen, so you don't have any of the other hormones during the presence of the progesterone. So once you drop the progesterone, you don't have any progesterone. So no ovarian hormone is going to be present, and as a result, nothing is going to be present to support the endometrial lining. So this will cause the endometrial shedding. The shedding of the endometrium will take place simply because I am not getting ovarian support. No ovarian support on here. And the phase in which we're going to be shedding the endometrial lining, this is what we're going to call the menstrual phase. So 3 phases of the menstrual cycles that we've mentioned. We have from day 1 to day 5. This is called the menstrual phase of the menstrual cycle. From day 1 to day 5, I'm sorry. And from day 6 to day 14, this is called the proliferative phase. And if you can remind me, please, what is the effective hormone that will be enhancing the proliferation of the stratum functionalis of the endometrium? This is going to be the estrogen. After ovulation takes place, next phase of the menstrual cycle is going to be the secretory phase, and this takes place under the effect of the progesterone. What's going to happen if no fertilization takes place again? You break down the corpus luteum, and once you break down the corpus luteum, you're going to have a drop in the progesterone level. Drop in the progesterone level, you won't have any hormonal support to the stratum functionalis of the endometrium, and this will result in shedding of the endometrium. This is what we're going to call the menstrual phase. And you see on here, this takes place from day 1 to day 5. So how would I respond as a hypothalamus to this drop in all the ovarian hormones? I don't have progesterone, I don't have estrogen. So how my hypothalamus will respond? The hypothalamus will start to produce GnRH another time. GnRH will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH. FSH will be stimulating another primordial follicle or another set of primordial follicles to become primary follicles, secondary for one of them to become a mature follicle, releasing estrogen, enhancing another proliferative phase to take place. Ovulation takes place under the effect of the LH surge, forming corpus luteum, and this will be releasing progesterone another time. Progesterone will have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland, causing a drop of the other hormones. If no fertilization takes place for this month as well, the corpus luteum is going to be degraded after 14 days. This degradation of the corpus luteum will be causing a drop in the progesterone level. Drop in the progesterone level will result in shedding of the endometrium. And who's going to detect this drop in the ovarian hormones? Again, is going to be your hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus will start to re-release GnRH, releasing FSH from the anterior pituitary gland, stimulating another set of primordial follicles to grow into primary, secondary, mature follicles that will be releasing again estrogen, which will enhance the proliferation of the endometrial lining, that will end up here transformed into corpus luteum, and this corpus luteum will be releasing progesterone, and the progesterone here will stimulate the glandular secretions, increase the blood supply through the spiral arteries of the endometrial lining. If no fertilization takes place another time, corpus luteum is going to be degraded after how long? Exactly 14 days. This drop in the ovarian hormones will cause shedding of the endometrium that we call menstrual phase of the menstrual cycle, and the cycle will keep going. This is why we call it a cycle. This is what's going to happen in the endometrium and the ovary every month after puberty. What if fertilization take place? If fertilization take place, the egg got penetrated by sperm. This will allow the secondary oocyte to become a mature ovum. The mature ovum here will fuse its genetic material with the genetic material coming from the sperm, and this will result in the formation of a zygote. This zygote will maintain the presence of the corpus luteum in the ovary for 3 months. 3 months. And what's going to happen after those 3 months is, do you want to shed the endometrium and release the embryo now? No, you don't. The function of the corpus luteum after 3 months is going to be replaced by the placenta of the baby. It's going to be releasing a similar hormone to the progesterone. This is called the human chorionic gonadotropin.